everyone. Welcome to the World of Momos podcast. And on this episode of Reflections and Reactions, we have a special guest with us, the leader of SDP, William Clouston. Hi there, William.
Hi, Mo. Good to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, hard work at the moment, but yeah, we're making progress.
Yeah, it's a busy end of the season, isn't it?
Yeah.
William Clouston is the current party leader of Social Democrat Party in UK. William first joined the SDP in 1982. He is a former district councillor and parliamentary candidate. He presently serves on Corbridge Parish Council in Northumberland. William became leader of Social Democrats in early 2018 and was re-elected in March 2020. William holds first and master's degree in urban planning and property management respectively, and read philosophy at Durham University at postgraduate level. So, today we're going to talk about several things, but first we're going to start with asking William about the current political situation, the current political layout, and SDP's role within that political framework. So over to you, William. What is going on? What are our expectations for the coming elections? And what do you think their minds are at, where they might be more likely to vote for?
Well, it's a very interesting situation politically in the UK because we have three establishment parties, four if you include the Greens, quite a small party, but the Lib Dems and the Tories and the Labour Party, whilst they might emphasise one or two differences, our critique is that they're basically all liberal parties of various kinds. And certainly in the Commons, if you look at the actual individuals, you'd struggle to detect which party many of them were in. Many of the Tories could easily be in the Lib Dems. Many of the Lib Dems could easily be in the Labour Party. So what you have is a sort of an establishment, what Professor Goodwin calls the new elite. And they probably represent, about 30% of public opinion, maximum probably. But they're vastly overrepresented in the political establishment, the cultural establishment, the academia, and in the political parties. So we have an odd situation, Mo, where the views of the public, about half of the public who have sort of faith flag family, traditional patriotic left, we'd call it, or conservative left, are really unrepresented at the moment by a particular party. And that's the gap, if you like, that the SDP is hoping to fill. Now, it'll take time, but I'm very confident about it because, as I say, the gap is there, and I see no prospect whatsoever that the Tories are capable of taking that up. You saw that with the Red Wall, by the way. Had an opportunity, didn't they, in 2019 to try and fill that gap, and they couldn't do it.
But that's the thing about both the Tories and Labour, isn't it? It is so easy for them that even though they keep messing up, they keep staying in power.
Yes.
Any other party would have wiped out the whole of the board, would have taken over the majority if they knew how to be an effective party. But they're not being led by policies for Britain.
Yes.
It seems as if they've been led by some sort of an overarching ideology. And within that ideology, some of them, they're all liberal minded. There's no difference between them in that sense. But some of them are fiscally conservative and some of them are fiscally liberal.
Yes.
That's the only difference I see between conservative and Labour.
I think that's really well put. Yeah, I think you've nailed it. On the social side, you really struggle to see any difference. I don't see any difference on the social conservative side. Obviously, there are some small pockets in the Tory party who are social conservatives, like Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates, John Hayes, but they're very small number. I mean, the vast majority of Tories are socially conservative, and you only have to look at their policies. I mean, they've been in power for 13 years. And all the sort of the progressive, politically correct, woke takeover of institutions has happened under their watch. They've done nothing about it. In fact, I think some of the Tories were barely even aware of it. Yeah, so that they,
And it is interesting to see because it's funny. I came into England in 2010,
mm,
right? So I've only been under a Tory government, but
mm,
within that government, I've seen a, like a weird change where the conservatives should not be making those changes,
mm,
and our public institutions and our local authorities and everywhere they become more and more political.
yes,
Whereas before I came to England, I had the sense that our civil service was supposed to be very apolitical,
mm,
but that hasn't been the case. But it has happened under them.
absolutely, yes. They've just watched this happen. I think part of it, if you're very charitable, part of it is naivety. I think some of
Mm,
them didn't really know what they were dealing with. They didn't realize how strong the progressive, cultural progressive liberals were.
mm,
But certainly in the institutions, you're right. I mean, the Home Office, Foreign Office, most departments of government are absolutely packed full of people that were educated at the same universities, largely went to the same educational establishments, and have the same views. I
yeah.
mean, if you have a socially conservative view, I mean, we saw that during Brexit, didn't we? I mean, Brexit happened, and the
Mm,
BBC, our national broadcaster, in Broadcasting House, couldn't find a single person in there that would declare
yeah.
that they voted Brexit. I mean, I think some of them did. Obviously, a
I
minority
think
did.
so. A lot of people would have done it, obviously, to be over the 50% mark.
Mm.
Like it has to be people over there, right?
Oh
But
yeah,
just they can't say it out loud because that's what I've seen as well. You say it out loud and you become a pariah in
yeah,
these institutions because they see you as having anything on the right, any conservative values if you have, and you
mm.
express them, you're seen as something of an oddity or something that you should not have, which is a very weird positions for public institutions to be at uh, when
Yeah.
we're supposed to sort of harness apolitical point of views.
Yeah, they're meant to represent and work for the whole of society. But you're
Hmm.
quite right. It was. I mean, the narrative was really quite narrow, and basically the ultra Remainer narrative was that Brexit was a sort of white racist project,
It still is in the
prosecuted
head.
by prosecuted by, and and they anything that went. I mean, so you only have to look at the polling figures.
Hmm.
Brexit was very well supported among the South Asian community, particularly
Mhm.
the Indian population in Britain. Very, very well supported, partly because a lot of people thought, well, why should we prioritize immigration from Europe and not other places? But there were
Hmm.
lots of reasons. I mean, there
Yeah.
may just be patriotic, democratic reasons for it.
Hmm.
Anyway, they couldn't see any of this or let any of that narrative through. And as a result, yeah, you're quite right. People, I'm sure if you were in the BBC and you voted Brexit, you'd probably keep quiet about it. We have many friends, many SDP members who are senior academics
Hmm.
who really, at the time of Brexit, took a beating
Yeah.
by their colleagues and
Hmm.
were castigated and chastised. But it's really quite, it reveals their ignorance, Mo, because
Hmm.
the traditionally the Eurosceptic position was more left wing than right wing.
Yeah.
Clement Attlee, Hugh Gaitskell, Peter Shaw, Michael Foot,
Hmm.
Barbara Castle, all of these figures, major Tony Benn, major figures on the left, were keen Eurosceptics for democratic
And
reasons.
it makes sense, doesn't it? Because I don't know, from my point of view, liberals are supposed to go for smaller governments
Mm,
as much as possible. So it makes sense to be, skeptic of a large institutions becoming
yeah.
undemocratically, your government.
Mm.
And I still don't. I think so. That is the problem because the left has shifted away from liberal values and has gone into a way where it's becoming unrecognizable from what people thought it would be.
Yeah, I think there's something in that, but I think the European dream was basically a form, another form of nationalism.
Mm,
Curiously enough, yeah, I mean all the flag waving, EU flag
yeah.
waving. I mean it has a flag, it has an anthem, and I think the reason it hurt ultra Remainers was that it sort of pricked the balloon, if you like,
Mm,
and just upset them in terms of their nationalism, type of nationalism
mm,
against another. But I mean, all the evidence is that people convene solidarity and sharing, which is what we are in a nation. We're meant to look after each
mm,
other. The highest level of that, pretty much the top level of that, is the nation state. And actually, you remember all the crises that happen in Europe, say the Greek crisis or the EU crisis, the Eurozone crisis.
Hmm.
There's very little willingness for
Yeah.
German taxpayers to share and pay
Mhm.
Greek
Yeah.
citizens' bills. So it all sort of falls apart in reality.
I mean, even when you see with the Ukraine and Russian
Mm,
conflict,
mm,
they literally had to be poked really hard before they engaged seriously into this matter, and then
mm,
they appeared as if they had been taking lead, but they were shamed by Britain,
mm,
by our involvement and our
mm,
help with Ukraine,
mm.
and then they had to act. But their initial reaction was, oh, Germany just agreeing to 5,000 helmets or something of that sort. So you could see, like, when it comes to pulling actually solidarity, the main players within EU, they
Mm.
actually are more likely to pull back, because then it becomes just about trade for them. It's no longer a unified vision for them.
Yeah, and it can't be. I mean, it just
Mm.
asking too much. I
Yeah.
mean, to ask, on a foreign policy question like that, you're never going to get
Mm.
unanimity within a state, never mind between states. I mean, if you look at the Poles have been very supportive and
Mm.
quite hostile to Russia's actions. You
Yeah.
can understand for historical reasons why that might be, but
Mm.
Hungary's government hasn't. The
Mm.
Germans have been all over the place,
Yeah.
actually, not able to show any leadership. And actually, on Ukraine, the most interventionist and pro uh, Ukrainian actor in Europe is Britain. It's true.
Yeah. And so, thinking about, like, how you said, 30%, around 30% of the people are in support of this elitist
Mm.
sort of liberal
Project.
mentality, right? That
Yes.
this
Yeah.
project, right? What is the current voting percentage? How many people on average vote in Britain?
In elections, the turnout, I mean, the total turnout in elections varies depending what election it is and where
Mm.
it is. So the lowest figures you'll get are local council elections in
Mm.
the big cities. And you can get down to 20%,
Mm.
25% would be normal.
Yeah.
Some more affluent areas, usually voting's a bit higher in those elections. Then you get mayoral elections, things like that.
Mm.
You can get 30% turnout in the big cities for that. But general elections, you will get 60%
Yeah.
plus
Which is
usually,
good.
which is good. And there are and it can be up to 70. It depends what sort
Mm.
of. I mean, 2019 was higher because people wanted Brexit done. It built up a sort of pressure to get
Yeah.
it done. I mean, in some countries, my wife is a foreign national, and she in the state that she's from, voting is compulsory.
Mm.
That's another approach.
Yeah.
I don't think we're
Australia
like.
does that, doesn't it?
Yes, that's correct. That's
Yeah.
the state. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are lots of ways. There are lots of theories on it, but yeah, I mean, it varies. I mean, it'll be interesting at the next election. Probably
Yeah.
next year. Could be 2025, but probably
Mm.
next year in 2024.
My wife is Polish, and over there, there's always a high turnout of
Mm,
people coming in.
mm,
Obviously, because very recently they come out of communism, where they didn't have their say, right? Just 1990, 1991.
yeah.
So they have more of a sense that no, we need to be involved. But
Mm,
there's something very unique, or maybe not unique, that they do with their elections. Is usually they have referendum questions with their elections as well.
yeah. In Poland.
Yeah, and I find that very interesting, because you're coming to vote anyways. Those referendum questions are not obviously, tied in as such, but it gives whoever is going to come into power a
Mm,
sense of where the mentality is. So that's that they had referendum questions around immigration and
mm,
so on and so on.
mm.
I- Is it not possible for us to think along those lines to get more sort of involvement of people?
I don't know. I'm not. I mean, people do. I mean, it's interesting what you say about Poland. I just on a digression. One of my dearest friends at university was a British Pole, and he
Mm.
left. This was in the 80s. I'm that old.
Mm.
Uh, he left and went and did a master's in urban design at Warsaw
Mm.
during martial law, and he said, "Well, do you want
Mm.
to come over?" And I said, "Yes, I'd love to." And I visited him, and it was interesting visiting during those times because there were tanks on the streets. It was the last sort of dying vestiges of communism.
Mm.
But you can see a state and anyway, I was based in Warsaw. We were sort of, our room was certainly bugged. They took a lot of interest in where we were going. We went down
Yeah.
to Krakow, but we had to get special passes for that and everything.
Mm.
And it's true that if a people has had to recently fight for those rights,
Mm.
I'm not surprised that the Poles turn out in big numbers and appreciate democracy. On the question of referendums, I'm not generally in favour
Mm.
of direct democracy
Mm.
in Britain. Why? Because we have a system of parliamentary democracy on sort of Burkean lines. That you elect a representative, not a delegate, and Parliament is sovereign.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit of a purist in that on anything. I mean, on again another digression on international law,
Mm.
we struggle to control our borders, partly because we're in a lot of international agreements, post-war protocols, and so on that stop us doing that. But legally, in this country, in our system, Parliament is sovereign, and if Parliament decided to not incorporate those laws, we could do it if we wanted to. It's a point I make a lot, and it's legally sound.
Yeah.
Parliament is sovereign; you can make new statute law to pull out of that.
But our parliament is very hesitant in exercising their power in that right. They're very. Why is it so hard for us to break treaties? Because when treaties are made, they can be broken as well,
Yes,
considering that they are not working for the nation.
that's correct. Yes. No, they have. I mean, again, they have international treaties of that kind have legal force only because it's a concept of incorporation into
Mm.
our law. Now, the authority for the incorporation is Parliament. So if Parliament wants to change it, it can do so. I mean, I think the reason, though, that they don't do it is that they're liberals. Putting it simply,
Yeah.
I think their heads,
Yeah.
their heads are so full of the liberal ideas that are inculcated and imbibed in education university
Mm.
that they literally can't think. I mean, they can't think beyond that, and also they would be branded as all sorts of things at their posh dinner parties, and would get sort of social appropriation for doing so. But the result is, of course, that the state can't defend its own interests. And one of my greatest political heroes is Lee Kuan Yew, and Goh Keng Swee, and a lot of the administrators in Singapore. Singapore's a state I know quite a lot about.
Mm.
And I often ask, what would Lee Kuan Yew do? And actually, he would have no trouble at all in applying law which suits Singapore for
Yeah.
Singapore's interests. But we really struggle over that now,
Yeah.
and I think it's a great pity. And it's yet another thing I blame on liberal overreach.
Yeah. I mean,
Culturally.
it makes it, apart from it making it homogenous, our decision making, it also, yeah, it moves away from the national project.
Mm,
It moves away from Britain, because now they're serving an ideology and they're not serving the public, and they just rather have the public serve their ideology as well. They rather just have the public follow them. They're not interested, and you can see within this government as well, as soon as Rishi Sunak came in,
mm,
you could see that he thinks in a certain way, which is
mm,
approved by the liberal elite, sort
mm,
of a thing, and he's just not interested in any cultural issues. Like, even when we had after October 7th, after the attack of Hamas,
mm,
we have had so many of these pro-Palestine marches, which for me seem a lot like anti-British marches rather than
mm.
pro-Palestine marches. All he has done is written a bit of a statement and put out on Twitter. That's all the major thing that I've seen from him.
Mm,
But when it came to talking about AI and stuff with Elon Musk, you can see him
mm.
so activated, right? And his project, and about, we're going to have the first airline with renewable fuels or whatever like
Yes.
that. He's so excited about that.
Mm.
I don't think so he's a bad person per se, but I think he's completely captured by that ideology, and it's just nothing else interests him as
Yeah,
much.
yeah, no, I think there's a lot in what you say there. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he's
Mm.
he's probably a reasonable technocrat, but you want something more than a technocrat. I mean, the
Mm.
people that I know that know him say, he's a hard worker and
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't drink and so on, and he's, that's fine. But
That comes across.
Yeah, no, that's fine. He's probably decent, but the on these broader cultural questions, he's completely at sea
Yeah.
and hasn't shown any leadership at all. But let's get back, so on a
Mm.
question which is he's been prime minister for some time,
Yeah.
and he's been in charge of the immigration figures,
Mm.
and in particular, he's in charge of the ultimately because the Treasury
Yeah.
control the thresholds for salaries and the
Mm.
rules for legal migration, which the figures came out the other day, and we're at 745, I think, net.
Mm.
Huge, huge, massive, massive amount of new migration, and he doesn't see any need or impetus to train
Yeah.
British people to reduce that, or to even acknowledge that there could be very big
Mm.
cultural implications down the line in terms of solidarity and social cohesion, all these
Yeah.
things, cultural sovereignty,
Yeah.
and he
There's
doesn't.
no alarm that rings in his head, like, it rings in my head as an immigrant as well.
Yeah,
What is happening? So
yeah.
I'm surprised that it doesn't ring in, like, in the whole of cabinet's head.
No, well, it doesn't, and because they and I have a little sort of strap line which I occasionally use in political rhetoric, which is that the Tories think the country is a shop,
Mm.
um, and I think there's a lot in that because they don't have any vocabulary for cultural
No.
questions. They don't even have the language for it, so they don't even
Yeah.
consider it. So to them, immigrants are just economic units. Do we need to fill this gap without
Yeah.
bothering to train anyone? Yeah, just turn it on like a tap. Uh,
Yeah.
but
But it's kind of weird, isn't it? Like, even I can see like them seeing Britain as a shop as well. Um,
mm,
but what's the point of having a shop even if your customers are not able to buy the products in your shop?
yeah,
Right?
yeah, no, but it's not. I mean, yeah, even if you looked at it that way, it doesn't. I
Yeah.
mean, and also even if you looked at it technically, what's the point of having gross migration at 1.2 million, 1.3 million, and not building any houses for people to move into?
Yeah.
Where do they think the migrants going to live?
Yeah.
They're not
There's no
thought.
care for the customers even, like, so you can see
No,
that even on that level there's a disconnect with the public or with the users of your
yeah,
services.
but it's beyond that. It's more than that.
Mm.
When I interviewed Alp Mehmet at Migration Watch, he made the point that this country is more uh, than that. It's a body of people with a history and
Yeah.
cultural
Yeah.
ideas and civil ideas. So you lose that, and I think we've
Yeah.
we've lost a lot of the common life.
Yeah.
And society becomes quite atomized. It becomes quite
Mm.
hard to bring together. And actually, you brought up the question of October the 7th and the
Mm.
ramifications for that in the West. And of course, it is very worrying because um, a very multicultural society would be judged in not so much when the times are easy,
Mm.
when you
Yeah.
get a challenge like this comes along, and then
Exactly.
you've got to, how, where is solidarity among our own citizens, between our own citizens, when something like that happens? Well, if you're
Yeah.
Jewish, and I've got friends, who've said, they're not willing to, or not, don't feel safe to wear the Star of
Mm.
David now.
Yeah. And
Just
how
feel
worrying is that?
it's appalling,
Yeah.
and that's so you can't to think that these things don't matter is plainly wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
I
as
do.
I was talking with someone about it, and I said to them, multiculturalism in the West, I see it as people viewing it as a carnival. It's a festival. Oh, people are going over there, they're having this food, that food. Oh, that juggler is
Yes,
doing this. They're
yes,
having a lot of fun. But when the
yeah,
carnival stops,
yes,
that's when you see the problems.
yeah. No, I think
You
you're
know,
right. I mean, I've debated and I heard many people, particularly on the progressive left,
mm,
talk about this. And another word I use, and the SDP uses a lot, is indifference,
mm,
because I think our political opponents are indifferent about some
mm,
of these things, and you make a point to them. Well, what about, you know, are you concerned if you're a, a minority in this country that feels threatened by another
mm,
larger minority? Are you concerned about it? No, it's all about, as you say, it's all about hummus or food. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
so that they think
yeah.
multiculturalism is about that, but they're not looking at the serious
Do you
challenges that come
think
up.
like a part of it might also be that we have moved so much towards materialism?
Mm.
especially in our liberal elites
Yes.
who are atheists. Now,
Mm.
I used to be an atheist as well. I'm more agnostic now after I
Mm.
left Islam.
Mm.
But I didn't like the materialistic viewpoint of a lot of atheists at that point. But that is the current uh, mainstream position of theirs as well. And when you become materialistic, then everything is only about the material exchange of things. That's why for them, multiculturalism is seeing more black and brown faces,
Yes.
different faces, or seeing hummus and stuff like that, the carnival aspect of
Mm.
life. But what
Mm.
they don't see is the actual soul of a country.
Yeah, no, I think again, you brought up yet another massively important thing. I think Europe, I think Western Europe in particular, secular Western Europe, has become. I mean, there is clearly culturally something missing.
Mm,
It's not easy for for me or anyone else to sort of point to quick solutions to this, because
yeah,
what's happened is we've lost our primary belief system, which is Christianity. I'm a churchgoer, but I'm not a believer. I'm
yeah, same, yeah,
married to a Roman Catholic, and we were married in the Catholic Church. But I don't think I can be a believer. But I like the belonging, and I
yeah.
attend
It's
mass.
a community aspect of it. That's
Yeah,
why I've also been telling people, like the British people, go back to your churches. Not in a way
yeah,
that I don't believe in God, but it's
mm,
sort of like you have to go back to your churches, and actually you have to ring your church bells, because you have to signal it out that this is our communities, this is
yes,
our culture, and this
yes,
is how we like it. This is not America. This is not
mm,
a nation of
mm,
immigrants.
mm,
This is a historical country, who's never been an immigration, like,
mm.
sort of a country like that. It's not a new country. It has roots. It has
I
ancient roots that needs to be respected.
Yeah, I agree, but I think the problem with that is that I mean, I approve of it, and I'd ring church bells ring in where I live
Mm,
every hour. But you'd be surprised how much opposition there
mm,
would be to that from progressives
yeah,
who atheist progressives.
who are more vocal as well.
Yeah, more vocal and really quite hostile. But they don't, what they don't realize, because
Mm,
they're narrow. This idea of sort of wide bandwidth, wide cultural
mm,
bandwidth. You meet a person, I can see you're such a person. You understand the complexities
yeah.
of what's going on, and you're not getting, very like someone that was obsessed with economics would just see it. Well, how much
Mm,
is it making? What it's a very
yeah.
narrow way of looking at the
Yeah.
world, but it's actually much broader than that. And I think that's the problem. I think what these aggressive secularists don't realize
Mm,
is that you have sawn off the branch you're sitting on, and it was I mean, it must be, just obviously, it must be a very dangerous thing for a society, for a secular society, to have large influxes of people that are very very different, and to try
mm,
and absorb it. So on the question of the marches, the post
mm,
uh, October the 7th marches. Yes, I mean, a lot of the people on the march are just pro Palestinian state
mm,
activists. That's fine. You have the right to march,
yeah.
but some are self-declared jihadists,
Mm,
and the problem is, and we have to be honest about it, that jihadism is not an easy bedfellow with secular democracy.
no.
you know,
Yeah.
so it's just, these are the things, the obvious things that some people, it just doesn't occur to them, and they are not willing to even address it or
But
think about
that's
it.
the break from the thread that binded the whole of Western society together, isn't it? The
Yeah,
Christianity. So
yeah,
when you break from that thread, that's when you don't recognize someone calling for jihad, specifically for jihad, as a threat. Because
yes,
historically, the West has fought Islam over and
mm,
over again with the
mm,
Turks and stuff. So there is an alarming matter of it. So when you take Poland, which is still very
yes,
religious,
yes,
or Hungary, they see
yes.
that threat straight away.
Well, yes, and I think in the state, I think Britain, England in particular, because it's an island and hasn't been subject to a
Hmm.
successful invasion since 1066, is uniquely vulnerable culturally
Hmm.
to having a casual attitude towards these things. Now, I mean, in Hungary's case, and certainly in the Balkans completely different. Most of those states have in relatively recent history been part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Christian, although they're falling populations, they see the differences. Let's put it that way. Whereas in England, no, you get sort of, it'll be all right, have a cup of tea. Now, it might be.
But what do we lose in the process? It might be okay, but till that time that it's okay, what have we lost in the process? Because you can see in our two-tier policing system as well. We've seen it is two-tier policing since the lockdowns happened. It has been even more. So and they say like, okay, we are policing by consent. Yeah, we're policing by consent as long as the public understand the concept of consent. If you're going to immigrate a lot of people who do not recognize consent, that sort of policing doesn't work anymore.
But it's also, I think things probably are changing a little bit. But the other main point of that is that I think it's been difficult for British police forces to police properly anyway in very, very diverse communities. And I was a student in Birmingham and I lived in Handsworth, and there was quite a nasty. There's been a number of riots in Handsworth in the 80s, but in 84, 85, when I was there, while I was there, there was a race riot, and two brothers who ran the post office were killed, burnt. It was horrific, and I was only 18, 19 or whatever, but I remember, I remember being shocked at how quickly it happened. Just that, how quickly these things could happen. Now, the spark for the riot was that the police issued a parking ticket to someone, and then who took against it, and then there was a sort of a roll from there, and it just got out of control. But whether it's something as mundane as that or something bigger, like the biggest, most troubling question for policing post-war of this type is the Rotherham scandal. And I think that was partly caused by a reticence for the police. The police literally didn't know
overcorrection sort of a thing.
How to deal with it. They didn't know how to deal with it. Now, in a single community where the police understand the community and the community understand the police, and it's not really a problem. But if it's across community, the police hesitate, and you can see it to this day in the, as you call it, two-tier policing in the streets. Comically, you saw it, with the EDL turning up on Remembrance weekend on the Saturday. Now, I would argue that one of the reasons that the police arrested so many EDL people, do you know why that was?
I think so. It's easier.
It's because they understand each other.
Yeah. Well, that's true as well. Yeah.
They understand each other. Yeah, and the police, police probably knew a lot of them. And the EDL knew the police, and they have a little bit of a scrap, and they get arrested, and they understand each other. I think the police. So you have the alternative image, the on the other end of the scale. You have police trying to police a much bigger march, and I accept it. I mean, my grandfather was a policeman. I was sort of brought up, with this a little bit. I can accept the police. It's not just a case if you've got 500,000 people marching or something. You just don't wade in and cause a riot. You might cause a riot. You've got to be aware of that. But where the police understood the EDL, they didn't understand the banners, and they had radioing into some sort of control room. What does this mean? What does that? So that is a problem. We just don't understand each other. And I've argued,
plus, if their advisors are going to be Islamists themselves, and not just Muslims, but actually endorsing the Islamist point of view, then obviously they're not going to get the right advice.
Yes. Oh yes. No. I did see I think there are all sorts of grifters and people who have been given posts, and also the other thing I think isn't right is that you've got self-appointed people speaking for whole communities. I represent the Muslim community. Well, you can't, mate. No. You can't. For a start, it's very diverse. There's lots of different groups, lots of different interpretations. You can't possibly do that. That's a problem. But I think in all this, we have to ask ourselves: is there a good case for a mass immigration pause to try and get to know each other, to
Yeah.
try and get integration and even
Yeah.
assimilation, which is a slightly different thing,
Yeah.
for a period of time. And I think there is, and I think if you can, I mean, my own family is multi-ethnic. Anyone that's got a stake in this
Yeah.
ought to take it seriously and ask yourself, do
Yeah.
you honestly think we are better carrying on with the sort of reckless policies we have, thoughtless policies actually? Because I sometimes tease Tories or people on the Labour Party who say, just what is how do you think your integration policy is going? Well, there isn't one, so
No.
don't even have one.
Exactly.
So so I think a good pause would do us good, and I'm talking about a generation. Just
Yeah.
get it settled down to normal immigration,
Yeah.
and see how we go. And actually, I'm reasonably optimistic. If we did that, I think we'd probably be right.
Yeah, I think so too as well. I mean, I can like give my own example. Like I came into Britain in 2010 because I love the country and I wanted to be British since I was young anyways. So that was my main motivation for coming in, and I eventually achieved that, and I am British now. But from how I saw Britain in 2010 can be summed as Paddington Bear coming to Paddington Station for the first time in London,
Yeah, yeah,
and trying to say hello and stuff like that to everyone, but everyone whizzing past him. It's sort of like, this is not the England I imagine it to be. When I came to England, I was like, oh, what has happened? Why are people not proud of their country? I grew up on studying British history and on, and I felt proud that I'm going to a country like that. But I found a people who were so disconnected, who were
yeah,
not how I seen them to be, and I saw pockets of immigrants or pockets of different nationals, in London, and I was like, well, this was not. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting people to have different portions where it's only majority of them are living over there rather than integrating. And I didn't
yeah,
see any, while I immigrated, I saw no process of the government helping me integrate, even though I didn't need any help. But there was no process. There was not like, okay,
yeah.
we'll help you with the language, we'll help you with the culture, or nothing of that
Yeah.
sort happened.
No, I think what you've said is very profound, very, 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 very important, which is the experience of an immigrant trying to accommodate and integrate and bed in
Hmm.
to a society whose elite, whose cultural elite, refuses to set the cultural tone.
Yeah.
They've abandoned it, and the level of hostility, self-hostility, the level of
Yeah, this self-hatred and
autophobia,
this, yeah.
self-hatred is so off the scale among the
Yeah.
cultural elite. But as I said, we started this. Your first question was really about the political landscape,
Yeah.
and my I wouldn't describe it as a faith, but my conviction is
Hmm.
that 50% of the public do not agree with this. I mean,
Yeah.
over 50%.
I
There's
think so.
probably
It's well
50,
over
60%.
50%. Yeah.
So we're not represented correctly, and
Hmm.
there's a massive gap for some of us to get together and say, no, we're in this together.
Yeah.
Social solidarity matters,
Hmm.
trust matters, and then we can do it. But you've
And
got to
common
step.
sense matters. Like,
Yeah.
it's not wrong to love your country. It's not
Mm,
wrong to want better things for your people first
mm, mm.
before for someone else. Like, so all policies should be geared towards that first.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter-in-law, who's Asian, she when she is comes across this phenomenon of what
Hmm.
we'd call technically you'd call um, national citizen out preference,
Hmm.
preference for
Yeah.
the out group,
Yeah.
not the in group. She finds this completely incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Can't what is going on? No, you're right. I think that there has to be a shift away from this approach, and it's failing anyway. I think
Hmm.
you'll no doubt have the ultra progressive liberals
Yeah.
in the West defending it to the last.
Yeah.
But my point politically is that the public don't think this way. The majority of the public,
No.
and and I think it would be better if we
Yeah.
we were a bit
Definitely.
tighter.
And I
Yeah.
think so the realization in the public is coming in, because now even materialistically that
Mm,
liberal project is failing, right?
mm,
So they can see materialistically them doing worse and worse and worse off.
mm,
So I think so there is a shift, and that's why I'm hoping for parties like SDP,
mm,
parties like Reform Party, to come into play. Doesn't I don't even care about the political stance of any of these parties.
mm,
I'm more concerned about, are they pro British, or are
mm,
they anti, or are they pro anything else but
mm,
British? Like,
mm,
so if there is a set of people who care about Britain, so
mm.
eventually they will adapt their thinking. If they're saying, "Oh, this is our policy," they won't be that. They wouldn't be flexible in their policies, because their
Yeah,
main concern will be British.
I think that's right. I think you might say that being, patriotic or pro-Britain is a first order thing,
Hmm.
but behind that, though, it's important. I mean, this is part of the SDP's approach, is to um, assess the idea. Can you be, for instance, I'll give you an example. So a lot of, since 1979, Mrs. Thatcher's period,
Hmm.
the Tory party has always said it's pro-Britain and
Hmm.
pro-British and patriotic, and
Yeah.
usually there's a Union flag here and there.
Hmm.
But I would argue that the type of economics they
Yeah.
prosecute mean that you can't be. I mean, it's all
Oh.
right saying you're pro-Britain, but so give you some examples. Would any pro-British party, pro-nation state party, have willingly chopped up its basic national assets, the critical national assets, water and electricity,
Yeah.
railways, power distribution and
Yeah.
supply, and flogged them off to foreign entities? Well, they just wouldn't have done.
No,
But
it
that's
doesn't
what
make sense. And it doesn't even make sense even during the Thatcher time, closing down all your mining industry,
no,
but not thinking about what happens to those people who are coming out of it,
precisely.
retraining them into something else, or at
Yeah.
least, or having a period of waning, or whatever it might be. But it's
Mm.
just like, okay, this is something we have to do. It's good for Britain. You
Well, it
think it's
wasn't.
good
Yeah,
for Britain. How can it be good for Britain when it's not good for its people? So
exactly. No, precisely. I don't usually use inflammatory language, but in my speech this year at the conference, I made a point that if you screw the workers, you screw the company,
yeah,
and I think if you screw the people, you screw the country. And I think so.
simple.
The sort of red bit of the SDP's colours the economics on the left side, moderate left side, because we're
Mm,
not anti-cap. We want the private sector to be
mm,
free to make and innovate and create.
yeah.
We're not against that at all. We're very pro it.
Mm,
But on the left side, it just is not patriotic at all to
yeah.
sell your national assets. And I think that also um, comes into trade. I mean, the trade policies which we've had, the very liberal trade policies we've had, could only really suit if you're constantly closing down factories in the West. I'm not just
Yeah.
talking about Britain. I'm talking about the
Everywhere.
United
Yeah.
States and all over the world.
Yeah.
Uh, I think people are political commentators are wondering why ex-Democrat voters in Cleveland, Ohio, or Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania
Mm,
would vote for Trump. Well, it's because you've closed down the factories, and
exactly.
then and you've got an opioid
Yeah.
epidemic now, and joblessness, and so on. And I think it was a lot of the executives that did that to their own corporations,
Yeah.
closing down factories and shipping the jobs
Yeah.
abroad, were tourists in their own countries. And I think that's a
Yeah.
uh, type of economic thinking on the right, which I think is very,
Yeah. It's
very
so disconnected from
unconservative.
the consequences to the public. It's so
Yeah,
disconnected from there. It's like you are stuck in an ideology when
yeah,
because you're serving the ideology over the interests of the people. If you
mm,
had the interests of the people first,
yeah,
you would be flexible in your ideology to serve the public first.
yeah. But
And
yeah, I totally agree. I just think it's the way the world has turned. I think the
mm,
whole of that, it's cliche, but neoliberal economics, or what I would call new right
yeah.
liberal economics, free trade purism,
Mm,
cannot be conservative and can't be
no.
patriotic in this sense. So I think it does. I mean, I agree. You want parties that are prepared to back the country, but you also want parties to know what's going on. I
Yes,
think.
yes.
Yeah.
To be more aware, to have people more savvy and stuff. That's
Mm,
why I like SDP and I like a Reform Party as well.
mm, mm.
Because even in Reform Party, they have people who have had professional lives. They have
Yeah.
done something in their life, so they
Yeah.
know how the world works. Now they might see it differently than most of the SDP of how the world should work, but at
Mm.
least they have been there in the real world and
I
done
think I
things.
think so. We have this electoral pact with the Reform
Hmm.
UK party, and we worked very hard for it.
Hmm.
We do have. I've never disputed. We do have very different ideas on the
Yeah,
economics, but
and it's good to have them.
yeah, but if and actually, but if you believe in PR, which I know
Yeah.
you wanted to talk about this, and if you believe in
Oh yeah,
PR,
yeah,
then you're going to have to work with other parties. And
yeah.
actually, if I mean, I think the Labour Party and the Tory Party and the Lib Dems are so bad. By the end of the decade, I think both Reform and the SDP could be much, much bigger.
Hmm.
And in the 2030s, if you're going to form a government, you're going to have to get on with some of these
Yeah.
other entities. So it's worth
Yeah,
working
I mean,
together.
I would love for either both a Reform Party and SDP to be in government, one being in government, one being in opposition. I mean,
Well, you never know.
exactly, and that is the positive hope that I have for the country, and that
Mm,
is what I want to tell people as well. This is possible. It's
mm,
possible because we are the people who are voting. We have
mm,
to break this in our head that it's either Tories or Labour. Most
mm,
people say, well, SDP or Reform Party, they don't have experience in government. It's like, well, look at Tories and Labour. They have a
mm,
lot of experience in
mm,
government. What have they done with their experience?
mm.
you know,
I know,
so
I know,
what does it matter?
precisely,
You know.
precisely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but on that subject, so Matt Goodwin has been going on about this, and I agree with him that smaller parties to come up, as has been the sort of the framework within Europe recently, they have to emphasize on one priority and bang on about that priority again and again and win
Mm,
on one sort of priority basis.
mm, mm.
Do you agree with that? And if that is the case, what are the SDP's priorities?
I don't entirely agree. I think I think I mean, I admire Matt a
Hmm.
lot. I think he's very perceptive, very, very good. But I think what the SDP is trying to do is to play a very long game and be a proper full spectrum political party. There's no doubt at all that he's right that if you have a small party and it has one uh,
Hmm.
basic aim, it's easier.
Yeah,
There's no doubt to get cut through. I'll give you an example. So, UKIP
yeah, yeah.
or the Green Party,
Hmm.
they both have very sharp.
Yeah.
It's in the name. What they want is in the name,
Hmm.
and therefore it's easier for what do the Greens stand for? Well, environmental, ecological
Yeah.
concerns. That's what it is. And likewise UKIP, self governing
Hmm.
nation, leave the EU. That's in
Yeah.
there. But it is harder. But I don't. I think. Yeah, I mean, I know Matt has talked about immigration as the issue. We
Hmm.
did we have a very good policy set on that, which is based on very good advice from barristers
Hmm.
about the legal aspects of this. Make you can't make policy on immigration law unless you're up to speed with what you can and can't do. But
Yeah.
we've done that, and we have a very good policy,
Hmm.
and we made a little film on the
Yeah.
migration crisis. So we do talk about it a lot, but I think the economics is very, very important to us. Trade is massively important because your trade policy ultimately, your manufacturing and industry and trade policy ultimately is the bedrock of your whole prosperity
Hmm.
in the country. If you get that wrong,
Yeah.
you'll just slowly get poorer, which is what's happened.
Yeah.
So that's very important. We emphasize the family very much. We talk about the family a lot. I don't think there's another party in the country talks about
No.
the family more than we do.
Yeah.
That again is another foundation of society. If all's well in the family, your society will be okay. But what we've had is family breakdown and
Yeah.
poverty and dysfunctionality
Hmm.
and problems. So standing up for the family and having policies that actually back the traditional family
Yeah.
is important. So we do that. The other thing that I talk about a lot, which is housing, which I know Matt
Mm.
Goodwin doesn't talk too much about, but I think is massively, massively important, is linked to all
Yes.
the other things. You know, if your housing policy isn't right, basically
Mm.
young people will struggle. A lot of their income will be spent on renting a little room somewhere in London.
Yeah.
40% of the new graduate jobs are in London. Kids go to London and spend half
Mm.
their wages on a little room. And then there's no route out of that for them to pair and get
Mm.
married and have kids.
Yeah.
That's I mean, and you know, the New Labour and the Tories are responsible for this, and it's so anti-family. And
Yeah.
because it's anti-family, it's anti-society.
Yes.
And so I think, you know, I'll never stop talking about housing.
Yeah.
So no, I think another thing I talk a lot about personally is transport and railways and
Mm.
trams. It's just an interest of
Yeah.
mine. I think it's neglected.
Yeah.
So
A lot of people don't understand what happens when you get geographically locked in one position. Your generations suffer because of it.
yeah, I mean, and there's two sides to that. I mean, I think we're quite keen on sort of blue Labour thinking, and the idea of place is very important. And I think to ask the structure of how we educate our young people
Hmm.
is to a far greater extent based on self-actualization and getting out of your
Yeah.
hometown. The idea that to get on you have to get out.
Yeah.
That often is the case. I take your point entirely, Mo,
Yeah.
on labour flexibility, but I also think some people want to make it in the region and where they're rooted,
Hmm.
where they have family
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and duty and obligations to the people around them. So
And we should be promoting that, because they have more stake in the country, because they are a part of the country, is theirs, sort of, they're deeply connected with it.
yeah, it's a more stable society. Most of us are rooted or want to be rooted in the way. The one of my favourite ever political quotes, which was by a New Zealand politician in the '60s, said that basically people want somewhere to live,
Hmm.
something to do, and someone to love.
Yeah.
Now, I think a politician, the final one, that may not be down to politics so much, but the first two, something to do, job,
Yeah.
purpose in life, meaning in life, and somewhere to be, somewhere to live, is very much political
Yeah.
and is very much. So I think So the answer to your question is, I think Matt is
I
right.
think
I mean,
so. Somewhere, someone to love is a lot political as well, in the sense that when you create good policies,
yes.
you create the conditions for people to be better, anyways, and be in the right time, in the right places to be
Mm.
with someone. You know,
Oh, I no, I think
you
that's
know.
right. I think yeah, I think it's interlinked, but I don't. I think that
But
final one is
if the first two is politics, if you get
yeah,
it right, then the last third
should
falls in
flourish.
place. Yeah.
Yeah, it should. But to answer your question, I think for us, I mean, I think it's a long term and a short term thing. I think
Mm.
the short term Matt is entirely right. If I banged on about immigration all the time,
Yeah.
yes, I get some cuts through on that. I get,
Mm.
and I've done lots of interviews on that anyway. But
Mm.
if I did, but the SDP is not a single issue entity.
Yeah.
We're a
Yeah.
serious. I think we are easily the most serious party in the country. We
Mm.
I want us to be. For instance, we're publishing a green paper.
Mm.
We did one on economics
Mm.
previously, but we're publishing a green paper in January or February
Mm.
next year, and it's on environment, agriculture, and food, and
Mm.
it's full of very, very interesting research
Yeah.
on that, on our farming systems and things. So we're going to continue to be a full
Yeah.
spectrum serious party. I think it would take longer, but I
Yeah.
think we get more respect
Yeah.
from the
I mean,
public.
otherwise it just becomes a populist sort of move,
Yeah,
where
it's not.
you make yourself a one trick pony then,
Yeah,
and
I agree.
that's not what the country needs. And I think so, like, people talk about immigration a lot, which
Mm,
is very important because of what we are seeing the problems now.
mm,
But if someone took a different stance with immigration, focused more on families,
mm,
because for me the single issue is the family.
Mm.
a family issue in this country. And
Mm.
if you fix that, then you have to, if you want to fix that, you have to fix all the other issues to make that happen.
You
So if
do.
you want good families, then you have to
Yeah.
make sure immigration is in place. If you
Mm.
want good families, then you have to make
Mm.
sure housing is in place,
Mm.
the transport is in place. So
Mm. Mm.
that is a more positive focal point rather than immigration is a symptom, a problematic symptom of not focusing on the families and not
Yeah.
focusing on our people and needing outside
Oh yeah. I mean,
resource.
the proximate cause of the government's preference to import large numbers of legal migrants is a failure of training. I mean,
Hmm.
the NHS is the case in point
Yeah,
where they have the budget.
it's happening in social care now as well. They're just bringing people from abroad.
They do, yeah, because it's a cheap, and it's very costly to the places they poach these nurses and care workers from. But leave that aside, it's because they can't be bothered to train, and they can train
Yeah.
if they want to. So another thing I say, Mo, a lot is in politics, and it's a big part of the SDP's sort of it's the light, not the shade. It's
Hmm.
the we. You can do something if you want to do it, but you have to elect people who want to do it.
Yes.
Sounds simple, but it
Yes.
really is true.
It is hard. It is hard to find people who actually want to put in the grind and want to do it and not just
Mm,
go for easy wins.
mm,
And that's what
mm,
I see. Like, I understand Matt Goodwin's point of, like, banging on about so only one topic that will get you elected, but
mm.
it will get your party elected. But who have you picked up along the way? What
Ye-
kind of people have you picked up along the way?
Single
Are they
issue,
the,
yeah,
yeah.
no, single issue people. I mean, I don't mind people having particular interests, but
Mm,
in my experience, the single issue activist is not going to get the SDP
no.
where it wants to go. Another really quite important, more subtle point is that we're against. I don't like angry politics. I
Yeah.
think that if you're, I mean, I'm not going to mention, but there's another small party
Mm,
somewhere, that goes for very, quite crude, angry politics all the
mm,
time. And the problem with that is that you will convene a lot of
yeah.
angry people, but you might convene 5% of the public.
Yeah.
But the key thing politically is you'll never ever get the 50 or 60% of
Yeah.
the general British population
Oh.
who don't
And
want
you
that.
know what you do? You are going to exclude that 5% of the people from the rest of the nation as well.
Yeah,
And they will, this is the politics of
it
resentment.
is.
And
It
it's
is.
going to build more and more resentment till something bad comes of it.
Yeah, no, and it would. I mean, and it could, in theory, that 5% could grow into 10%. But my point
Hmm.
politically is a more
Yeah, it's,
is a cruder one in a
yeah.
way. What I'm saying is
Hmm.
you can't form a
You
government.
can't, no.
What these
Yeah.
people are doing is making a lot of noise in a corner and
Hmm.
making people agitated.
Yeah.
They're not bringing anyone together, and they're not gonna. In
Yeah.
the end, they'll never get to the. If you look at it, the metaphor of a mountain, they'll never get to the top of the mountain because
No.
their ceiling is too small.
Yeah.
They're convening a little part of society that want to
Hmm.
lash out, and okay, I can understand people getting angry, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
SDP's project is a much broader one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. And this is why I like SDP, because, SDP recognizes what the threats are.
mm,
It's not as if SDP is not recognizing what the immediate threats are to this nation and what the
mm,
long term threats are,
mm,
but is that you have a plan, you have solutions. You're not just
mm,
banging on about the problems. There are
mhm.
solutions, there are credible solutions, there are routes on how you can overcome those issues.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
There's no point. I mean, what would be the point? I always, it's in the end, it's always about
It's not
how
about
can you
getting
make it better.
elected.
No, no, no. It's about
Yeah.
what do you have ideas? Have you thought things through? Are your
Hmm.
diagnoses right, and are your solutions the right ones for the country?
Yeah. And now I want to talk about proportional representation,
Mm,
because a lot of people do not understand, first of all, what is proportional representation and why it is necessary for our country.
okay.
So, yeah.
Well, basically the best way to start this is to start with what we have now, which is a system called first past the post, which is elegantly simple. And by the way, when I talk about this and like a lot of other things, I'm not one that says PR has the best is the best
Mm,
ideas and all the. I think there are very good arguments on both sides of this argument, right?
mm,
So what we have at the moment is first past the post, and it's very elegantly simple, which is we have 650 seats that are geographically determined, and the public vote for MPs, and whatever you get out of that is whatever you get.
Hmm.
Right? Very simple. And the system leaves the composition of Parliament up to that system.
Hmm.
What it results in, partly for cultural reasons, is that you have two very dominant parties, and it's because of the electoral dynamics of how the voting happens. Those dominant parties dominate politics, and what
Hmm.
happens is one or other of them usually forms a government, and the weaker one, the one that's lost an election, still has 200 or so MPs or 250 MPs, and is allowed time to recover.
Hmm.
And in time, the public gets sick of the government's in, and then they come back in. So you get this oscillation from
Yeah.
Labour to Tories, and sometimes the Lib Dems are involved or whatever. But oscillation from one.
Competition of who can screw up more.
Yes, exactly. Well, and I'd argue that they've
Yeah.
both done pretty well at that.
Yeah.
So that this is the system you have, and from a constitutional point of view, you say, well, it's not the system. That's what the British people do. Anyone can have the right, but it does lock out. Locks out smaller parties and challenger parties. Why? Because on the dynamics, we might get 100,000 votes, 150,000 votes next election, quite possibly, and get no MPs. Could happen. If and yet you're getting MPs elected on 20,000 easily. So you don't. The system doesn't deliver. It doesn't transfer crudely. It doesn't transfer votes into seats in a
Hmm.
proportional way. And I'll give you, before I go on to the question of how you can remedy this, one of the consequences of the first past the post is not only that the two big parties dominate and are allowed to recover, but that the views and ideas and contributions and insights that exist in the whole country are not well represented in Parliament.
Hmm.
Right. So what you
Yeah.
get out of the system is a very filtered system. You go through the selection processes of the Labour Party and the Tories and the Lib Dems, and once you're past all that, and then you get to be a candidate, and the candidate's ratified really rather than elected, and then you have a Parliament that's composed of very similar people, and if you don't believe me, look at the Brexit vote, because in the Brexit vote you had 650 MPs and only about 120 supported Brexit, which was the mainstream majority position in the country. So Parliament is not reflecting the views out there.
Hmm.
Now, if you want Parliament to represent the British people's views to a greater extent and to have new challengers have the opportunity, you have to go to a more proportional system. And there are lots of different technical ways of doing that. But to cut a long story short, what would happen in a national election is if a party turned up and got 5% of the vote or 10% of the vote, it would roughly get 5 or 10% of the seats. And what you change the dynamics entirely, because then you have lots, instead of having two dominant parties and a few others, you have lots of parties in Parliament. I've no doubt we'd have. I mean, for instance, Mo, you'd end up with a Conservative Party,
Hmm.
which I've always thought was, and it might even be us, although we're Conservatives of the left.
Hmm.
I think it is important because, after all, there are Conservatives, so there should be a Conservative Party. Likewise, you might have a Socialist Party proper. I mean, we
Hmm.
have quite left wing. Our economics is probably to the left of the Labour Party, but you might get a proper, real Socialist Party, and that's fine because there are socialists.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not have them represented in Parliament? So yes, I mean, in the end, it would be easier. There's a lot of support for a proportional system. It would be
Hmm.
I acknowledge there's no going back there. I mean, one thing you have to acknowledge is that you're likely to get a lot of coalitions. You're
Hmm.
likely to lose the catharsis of a single result getting rid of a government.
Hmm.
So you lose that. I think you would lose that to an extent. So these great big 1979 or 1997 or these moments or 2019, these moments where the public decide and then the incumbents are it changes.
Hmm.
You would lose that. I acknowledge that you'd lose that. So there are always pluses and minuses, but
But isn't that a good thing to lose one party holds on government? Because I mean, one party with, let's say, a voting of 20-30%,
Mm,
it does not represent the whole of the country anyways.
mm.
Even in one household, you
Yeah.
don't have equal representation of the views of life, so isn't it important for our governments to be a coalition, a form of coalitions, rather than just one single?
I think so, and I mean I've been generous to the constitutional conservative side
Mm,
by saying that I think you do lose the catharsis of sacking a government if you
mm,
go for
yeah,
a proportion. But on the other side, I think it is true that all the Labour Party and the Tory Party are coalitions,
yeah,
evidently,
exactly,
because you can see the divisions.
yeah,
So they are coalitions anyway. The only difference is between PR and our present system is that under our present system, the coalition is done first.
mm,
You join the Tory party, you join the Labour Party, you're part of a big coalition, and those coalitions win.
mm,
Under PR, you'd get an election, and then you work out a coalition. So
yeah,
it's not don't we shouldn't pretend that you can't have a government that isn't a coalition of various
yeah,
interests,
yeah,
competing interests. You're going to get that. But I think one thing that's worth saying is just on the actual fairness point.
mm,
Um, there are two great examples of this. The first is my own party, the SDP, in 1983, when we had an alliance with the Liberals. We got 26% of the vote and got 23 seats. The Labour Party got 27.5 and got 210 seats.
mm,
That's how bad. And
yeah,
I worked on that election. I was a young man, and
mm.
I just thought it was just a gross
It's unfair.
perversion of justice.
Yeah, it's
Um,
completely unfair, and that's why I think, I mean, as you said, like, there are merits and demerits on both sides of
mm,
the argument.
mm,
But this is the main reason why I think proportional representation sort of makes sense, because, it represents the people, and it doesn't lock out people because of geographical positions, their point of views and stuff. This, it's and it doesn't give other point of views more leverage because they have a geographical advantage on certain things because of their demographics of that geography. So it's
yeah.
important to have the whole view of it, and people get scared as well because they're seeing now the Islamists waking up, or sort of rising up in this
Mm,
country. They
mm,
see the socialist or the communist
mm,
sort of trying to
mm,
rise up within that ranks as well.
mm.
And the thing, not having proportional representation freezes them out, freezes those fringes out. But the point
Yeah.
is, it doesn't matter because it's freezing you out as well. So
Yeah.
it's better to have the danger out at front so that we can deal with it. And even with the coalitions, it's better
Mm,
to have the coalitions out at front, at the front of the public, where it says, oh, this party is doing a coalition with this party, rather
mm,
than doing it behind doors, and they already have a coalition of whatever sort,
mm.
but
I
we
think
don't
that's
know.
right. I think the other point that follows from that is that it enables people to vote honestly. So what
Mm,
happens now is
yes,
that
not tactically.
yes, they're forced to they go into the parliament booth and they look at what the least worst option is, and they're forced to vote for it. And I would like people to vote for positively for something they actually believe in,
Mm,
and then we see where we go. Um, I think there are signs that the campaign for PR is making progress. The Labour Party conference adopted it as
mm,
its resolution in 2022. And it nearly did in 2021, actually. But I'm not naive. I think if Keir Starmer wins handsomely, it'll be off the agenda for the Labour Party. But I think in the end, pressure will make it come.
yeah.
And but even if it doesn't, as a party, we're planning our electoral planning and tactics
Mm.
nationally are to focus, like the Green Party, in one particular area, which is for us is Leeds, South Leeds. And if we win a seat this decade, it'll be in Parliament. It'll be there.
Within Western democracies, has is there any other country out there which does proportional representation and does it successfully? Do we have a map to see, if they didn't have it, how they had it, and how it's working for them?
Yes, I mean, most European democracies are run on a proportional basis, so virtually, I mean, you can take your pick, Germany, Holland, Spain, Portugal, whatever. You could take your pick, Italy.
Yeah.
And what people tend to do is pick, if they're against PR, they pick political cultures that produce, like Israel, which produces 24 parties that get into parliament, and it's chaos because they can't form coalitions.
Yeah.
Because the parties aren't big enough. It tells you, but I don't think actually that would happen in our society mode, because of another observation which you make if you're keen on paying attention to Anglo cultures, is that Anglo cultures tend to produce two large parties. So if you look at Ireland, I know it's breaking up a little bit, but Ireland, Britain, Canada, the United States, New Zealand, and Australia tend to have a conservative type party and a socialist type party, and so there's obviously something going on culturally there that means that in our culture we tend to coalesce in a big block. Now, under a PR system, I still think that would happen. Yeah. So I don't, for instance, think Britain would end up with 24 parties. I think you'd end up with eight probably.
Yeah,
and that would be workable, and that would be fine. And
I mean, if we see within the Tory party, so there are 120 MPs which are not following the current mainstream Tory liberal point of view. So in a proportional representation, they would still be there, but probably as another party, and then they could have a proper coalition with the Tory party and affect the outcomes and the policies better. But within this sort of system, those 120 can be put on the back benches and can just be forgotten.
It's quite correct. Yeah, I mean, I think what usually happens is that you get a particular policy domain in a coalition which you say, right, we want that, and that's so. Give you an example. Yeah, you're quite right. I don't think there are. On my reading of the Tory party, parliamentary party, I don't think there are 120 Conservatives in there.
Probably
I think
way
probably
less.
There are less, and there are only really 5 or 6 which we identify as quite close to us, and we know them and get on with them quite well. But yeah, there's no doubt that you would get parties asking for particular things. I mean, if, for instance, if the SDP in the 2030s were in a coalition bargaining situation, probably the prime 2 things we'd ask for are nationalisation of the railways and housing, and a proper housing programme. And you might get one of those, you might get both. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but at least people who voted for you are getting their money's worth, sort of thing.
Something.
That, and it's not getting lost. It's not like, oh, I voted for this MP, and this MP talked about housing, so that's why I voted for him. But then that MP has gone on to the bigger engine of the Labour Party or whatever, or Tory party, and then his issue is not the priority of the government, and then my reason for voting for him is lost.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's how it tends to work. And I've done a number of speeches for Make Votes Matter and attended their events and things and made the case. But what I never do is pretend there aren't good arguments on both sides. I mean, actually, even in the SDP, and the SDP is, in British political history, is the biggest challenge to the two-party system that we've ever had in the 80s, and it didn't come through then. But even with our political heritage, and I would say 90% of Social Democrats in our party want PR, but I'd say 10% don't. And I'm perfectly.
But it's good to have them because it keeps you honest.
Yeah, I'm totally comfortable, and actually, 2 chairs away, the chairman of the SDP in 2020 was Dr. Kevin Hickson, who's an academic at Liverpool University, and describes himself as a socialist, and that's fine again by me. Social democracy is a type of socialism, I think. And he was a constitutional conservative who didn't believe in PR, but he still got to the top and was a chairman of the party, and it's fine. But I think the party's policy will remain for the foreseeable future. PR. I think we've always been keen on it.
And this is what when some people on social media or whatever, they talk about like SDP or Reform Party or whatever party, and they pick out one reason and then that one reason becomes their main reason. Oh, that's why I don't support this party. And that's what I try telling them. It doesn't matter, like those one singular points can be changed, but look at the core of the
They'll never,
party.
they'll never, those people will never find a party that
No, because
they
like,
love.
oh, you're currently supporting the Tory party, or you're currently supporting the Labour party. How many points over there you don't agree with? You're nitpicking on this party, which is actually trying to do something good.
George,
And that party that has a long-standing historical example of not doing good.
yeah.
So
Yeah, no, if you, I mean, George Orwell put this best when he said only a bigot supports everything a political party says. I think that's absolutely true. And I think he's right. And I think
yeah,
if you look at a party and you're on the page with 80% of the policies, that is a very, very good fit. And you'll never, and actually after
I would
all,
say even 70% is
yeah,
good
even
enough.
70
Yeah,
possibly, yeah. And that's a pretty good fit. And you're always going to have to make compromise and actually join the party and then try and argue your case.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think so. This is a good point to end our conversation now, because we've taken a lot of your time and you're really busy.
Well, it's been a pleasure. No, it's been lovely
Yeah.
to discuss it with you, Mo, and and keep in touch. It's
Yes.
been a pleasure.
Yeah, and it's been amazing having you, and like it's a privilege for me for you being on my podcast.
That's very kind of you to
It's
say that.
an amazing conversation as well. Hopefully, more and more people can see these conversations and understand why there's a need for different parties.
Thank you. Well, we'll share it widely. It's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Cheers. Bye bye.